Hi everyone. I hope you're all making the best of this quarantine that we are in. Here is my portion of the presentation. I'm doing the overview and the global perspectives. So to start, we are doing eating disorders. I'm Michelle Philippone. To begin, we have the overview. At least 20 million women and 10 million men in this United States suffer from an eating disorder at some point in their life. Typically, these eating disorders will start when they are younger, and they may carry through lifetime, but typically they begin when they're young. Anorexia nervosa has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder. We will go over all the different types of eating disorders in a couple slides, but just a little overview right now. The interesting thing I wanted to bring up too is males develop eating disorders too. I feel like a lot of times people view eating disorders as a female-only disease, where that is just not the case because 25% of individuals with anorexia nervosa are male, and 36% of individuals with binge eating disorder are male. Over 70% of those who suffer with eating disorders will not seek treatment. And the rate of children under 12 being admitted to the hospitals has risen 119% in the last decade due to eating disorders. As mentioned before, a lot of them eating disorders develop when you're younger. So 95% of people with eating disorders are ages 12 to 25. And finally, some relieving news. 80% of patients who do receive treatment, they will recover and improve greatly. However, most don't seek treatment until they're near very close to death. Couple stats by race. This one it only compares black and white, and as you can see from this data, white people are more likely to develop eating disorders. Looking at anorexia nervosa, there are percentage of black people, it's very slim. Very, very slim. Whereas binge eating disorders are a lot higher. Not as high as white people, but still rising in number. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So this was a study that was conducted by the Department of Psychiatry. This was in Israel that they looked at this, and they talked about how African American women are more likely to be affected by a binge eating disorder than they are anorexia or bulimia, indicating that race may affect the incidence of eating and other psychiatric disorders. What they found in their studies, they had samples of white and black women, and they were shown different types of women and asked, what do you find more attractive? White women were more likely to rate thinner figures as being attractive, whereas black women were more likely to rate heavier figures as being more attractive. With this idea, you can see how white women are more likely to have anorexia nervosa, that thrive for that thin, skinny body, whereas black women are more likely to develop binge eating disorders because of that tendency to favor the heavier figure, to be thicker. However, both Caucasian and African American women present difficulties in regards to food and eating patterns. Just the nature of their difficulties varies among ethnic groups. So on the next slide, I have this it was supposed to be a little activity for us to do in class. Basically, I have all the eating disorders that I'm going to mention on the left, and on the right, I have their definitions. Basically, for the first one, I just would want you guys to tell me, anorexia nervosa, which one is it? And then as you can see in the next slide, you can see if you were right. This is what I would have done if we were in class, but since we're here, I'll quickly just mention them. So anorexia nervosa is a serious, potentially life-threatening eating disorder characterized by self-starvation and excessive weight loss. Bulimia nervosa is an obsessive desire to lose weight in which bouts of extreme overeating are followed by depression and self-induced vomiting, purging, or fasting. Rumination disorder. This is repeated regurgitation of food for a period of at least 1 month. Regurgitated food may be rechewed, reswallowed, or spit out. We'll talk about this briefly, but this is very common in babies, not necessarily in adults. Avoidant restrictive food intake. This is like an eating disorder that's based on you don't have an interest in food. You're avoiding it based on characteristics of that food, sensory. So a lot of time people will, not necessarily people with this eating disorder, but people in general, we all kind of say like, oh, I don't, like me personally, I don't like mushrooms because their texture freaks me out. That's kind of going along the lines of what this is about, but it's to an extreme that brings it to the point people are not eating. They're just avoiding food altogether. Next is the binge eating disorder. This is a serious eating disorder in which you frequently consume unusually large amounts of food and you feel unable to stop doing so. Pica is a compulsive eating disorder in which people eat non-food items. Clay, paint are the most common items. And other specified feeding or eating disorders is a clinical category used to describe a variety of disordered eating behaviors that don't meet the DSM-5 criteria for a specific eating disorder. Let's talk about some of these. So other specified eating disorders, like I said, these are disorders that cannot be classified by DSM-5 criteria, so they kind of just get tossed into this category. Things like orthorexia, which is a compulsive checking of ingredients list nutritional labels, which I can give you a little something here. So if you look at this is an example of orthorexia. Can I eat this? Is it healthy? Is that too high in sugar? Oh my gosh, that sodium is really high. Is that going to be even healthy for me? Is 10 calories too much? That's that obsessive behavior that they have with food, like a stalk of celery, which we all know costs calories to burn it off in our body. Laxative abuse, eliminating unwanted calories, losing weight, feeling thin, feel empty, through repeated, frequent use of laxatives. Compulsive exercise that significantly interferes with important activities occurring at inappropriate times or inappropriate settings. When an individual continues to exercise despite injury or medical complications. This one is actually, I've seen this. When I was in college, we had this boy who, he would go to the gym, he would be on the stair climber for 2 hours straight on full speed. And if you've ever done the stair climber before, you know it is hard and it hurts your quads. I don't know how he did it. He was so thin as well. It was an awful sight to see sometimes at the gym just because you knew something was going on and he wouldn't talk to anyone. So let's go into some of the big major ones. So we have anorexia nervosa. Some of these physical signs will be menstrual irregularities, dizziness and fainting, lack of food, thinning of your hair, impaired immune function, stomach cramps, feeling cold all the time, difficulties concentrating, and sleep problems. Emotional behaviors, dramatic weight loss, consistently making excuses to avoid meals, and has an intense fear of gaining weight. Now, this isn't you at a party saying, I'm not going to eat cake, I don't want to gain any weight. This is, an intense eats them alive fear that they will gain weight. And they tend to dress in layers just to hide their weight loss and to stay warm. Bulimia nervosa, some physical signs, noticeable fluctuations in weight, fine hair, cuts and calluses on the top of the finger joints from the self-induced vomiting, yellowing skin, typically their teeth too will turn yellow from the stomach acid coming back up, sleep problems, feeling cold, impaired immune functioning, and difficulties concentrating. The emotional behaviors, see them there, fears of eating in public because they need a place where they can go and expel later. They drink excessive amounts of water. They tend to look bloated from the fluid retention. And usually, this is the biggest one, they'll disappear after meals. They'll go to the bathroom and they'll be there for a while. That definitely is a red flag. Kind of the cycle of this binge and purge. They'll diet strict. They'll slip up on their diet, as most of us tend to do sometimes. However, This triggers binge eating, and they will eat and they will eat and they will eat because they're like, wow, like I slipped up, let me just continue with that. And then they purge. They go to the bathroom and they expel it. Now they have feelings of shame and self-hatred. Now they're back to strict dieting. Now that goes again until they slip up on their diet. Binge eating disorder. This is more than just emotional eating. This is not, I had a breakup and I'm just filling the void with some food. No, this goes so far beyond that. This is physical signs: noticeable weight fluctuations, stomach cramps, difficulties concentrating. The emotional signs: they steal and they hoard food in strange places. Frequent checking in the mirror for perceived flaws, fear of eating in public, and they create their lifestyle and rituals to make time for binging. Their whole life is revolved around this. And a little cycle for them: diet and restrict, feeling good about themselves. They're on this diet. That's great. Then their actions. Physical or emotional needs lead to inability to restrict. They binge. Now they have guilt, fear, remorse. Then they get back in control and they diet. It's a constant cycle, which is why you'll have all those weight fluctuations up and down with their weights. Other eating disorders, we have pica. This is the persistent eating over a period of at least 1 month of substances that are not food. Paper, soap, cloth, hair, string, wool, chalk, talcum powder, gum, metal, pebbles, anything. It's not food. Typically people who are iron deficient and malnourished, they're two most common people to experience pica, followed by pregnant women, which I found interesting. Then the rumination, like I mentioned, this is typically seen in small children and infants. That's the regurgitation of food, rechewed, reswallowed, or spit out. Symptoms: bad breath, tooth decay, tooth loss, raw, chapped lips. Causes are physical illness or severe stress may trigger the behavior, and neglect from their mothers. For both of these, it's really unclear how people are affected by these. These are going to be ones that typically go unreported, so finding reports is very difficult. And this is Lisa's section, so I will skip. Full perspective. This is a very interesting map. This is the share of the population with an eating disorder. This is 2017. This is from Our World in Data. So as you can see, I circled the countries. We have Australia, and we have, looks like we have Spain, and we have Italy. Those are where we're seeing the highest rates of eating disorders. But these are deaths by eating disorders. Australia, almost none. Spain, almost none. Italy, a little bit. Two strongest: United States, Japan. Going back, United States is up there with their percentage of people with eating disorders. So with Japan, if you can kind of see. However, the majority of deaths are coming from these countries, meaning they're not getting treatment. So let's talk about Europe just in general. There's a study done in 2009, surveyed 6 countries: Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands. They took males and they took females, and they looked at lifetime prevalence and 12-month prevalence of the common eating disorders: anorexia, bulimia, binge eating. If you look, the anorexia, in the lifetime prevalence, 0 in males, 22 in females. And in the 12-month prevalence, 0 in males, 1 in females. So over a 12-month period, 1 developed this anorexia nervosa, but a lifetime prevalence, 22 females. No men. Interesting. Bulimia, in lifetime prevalence, 5 males, 41 females. 12-month prevalence, 1 male, 10 females. Okay, so males do struggle with bulimia. Binge eating disorder. 12 males, 64 female. 12-month prevalence, 4 male, 24 female. There is a huge gender gap with people who develop eating disorders, probably because of the standards that are put on women to be thin, to be